Okay, well, welcome everybody. John Berquist with Binary Office here again with part 2 of our invoice automation video series. I am here today again with the nice folks at Ancora Software. I have Mike Haggins with me. Mike, are you there?
I am, John. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thanks for joining us. Everybody, for those of you who have not seen part 1 of the video, for introduction purposes, Binary Office is a paper automation company. We help our customers automate paper processes in their office and in the best case scenario completely eliminate the paper. But for those cases where we can't completely eliminate the paper, we use various software tools that we have in our tool belt to scan and automate the paper process for our customers. And I encourage you to see our website, binaryoffice.com, where we have laid out for you several key areas where we automate paperwork, including routing paper and scanning paper to read the data automatically for you. The video series is located on our YouTube channel, which is under Binary Office. If you just go to YouTube and search for Binary Office, you'll come to my company YouTube page. Underneath there, off to the left, I have a series of playlists. You can click there or just scroll down, and under the Accounts Payable, Automating Accounts Payable playlist, if you click on that playlist, there are several videos there for automating invoices. Part 1, full Part 1 demonstration is there, and a shortened version of that Part 1. So I encourage you to watch that if you haven't done so already. But for today's purposes, we have Mike Haggins with Ancora Software with us, and we're going to have him show the processing of multi-page invoices this time for part 2 in our series, and also the approval routing of invoices. So I'm going to, Mike, pass controls over to you, and you ought to see that come through in a second. There we go.
Got it, John. Thank you. All right. So we've already logged into the Ancora Docs software, and what we're going to do as the first part of this presentation is we're going to bring in a multi-page document that the system has never seen before. We're going to process it through. We're going to set it up so that the system knows precisely how to treat each page of the document, and then we are going to process that through to completion. Okay, so we're going to start by simply adding pages to the system. And in this case, what we are going to do is to add a PDF.
And typically, Mike, just for our listeners, typically this would be a user in the AP department scanning an invoice, but in our case, we don't have a scanner hooked up, so we're just bringing in the image. So just pretend we're scanning, right?
That's exactly correct, John. Okay, so what we've brought in here is a 4-page document. And I use the term document as opposed to invoice because in this 4-page document, 2 pages are actually the invoice itself. So here's page 1, and here's page 2 of that invoice. But page 3, for demonstration purposes, we're going to consider this to be an attachment, which means that we want to keep it with the document as it goes through the system, but we do not want to process it with OCR, and we do not want to capture any data off of it. And the last page...
That, Mike, I think that's a neat feature you guys built into Ancora Docs, and we like neat stuff and we like free stuff here, and both cases apply. But I particularly like that because, in fact, I do have many of my users have multi-page invoices that have attachments or supporting documents to them, so they want to keep that together. However, they don't want to pay the additional licensing costs for the scanning software and artificially inflate the number of pages going through the EncoroDocs software. So in this case, it's nice because we can keep it all together, process it all together, but as you say, exclude it from OCRing. So that's a great feature, I think.
Exactly. Well, thanks, John. And that's kind of the reason that we put this in there. So page 3 of this document, as I say, is an attachment for our purposes today. And page 4 we're going to call an accidental scan, which means that I do not want to keep this page with the document, and I'm going to ask the system to please remove it for me. Now the question is how do I tell the system all of this information? Well, when we queue this job up in preparation for the OCR phase, when I hit the Queue Job button, what I launch is what we call our Document Reorder tool. In this tool are all 4 of the images that we brought into the system, but you'll notice that there is a green page separator bar between each of the pages in this document. And at the moment, the system does not distinguish one page type from another. So our job is to tell it that these first 2 pages are the actual invoice. This 3rd page is an attachment to carry with the invoice but not to process. And the 4th page we want the system to delete for us. We don't even want to carry it through the system. So how difficult is it to do that? Well, I'm going to click on this button here to attach page 1 and page 2, and you can see that the vertical separator is gone. I'm going to click on the A button to visually mark, and to tell the system that this page is an attachment. And I'm going to click on the delete button on the last page. I'll confirm that deletion. And you can see that the operator is visually shown that this is indeed a page that will be deleted from the system. Okay, and once we're happy with the construction of that document, we'll say OK, and the system will send that off to the OCR queue, which will run automatically. Meanwhile, we will go in and into Verify and wait for that job to show up. When that job shows up and is ready for a verification operator to work, there will be a small blue circle here with a white exclamation point, just like that, that says, "We have work waiting." So,
and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also another nice feature in EncoroDocs that allows you to, if you want to automate that ignoring of pages, additional pages, if you will, to a little more automated extent. So if you want to only look at page 1s of certain invoice templates, you can set that as a setting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so just wanted to make that distinction, because I do have some users, they're only interested in page 1, and there's no reason to manually have an operator do that, so you can automate that process.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, John, you can automate it based on a specific vendor. So if you have, for instance, a vendor for your phone service that likes to give you 10-page phone bills, but all of the pertinent information is on page 1, you can configure the system so that it will only process page 1 of any invoice from that vendor that matches up to the template for that vendor. So it's a very flexible environment to be able to tell the system specifically what to process and specifically what to treat as an attachment.
Great, understand. So it looks like we have the blue light and we're ready to go there?
We are ready to go, and all I'm going to do is go over here and click on my next job, and the invoice that we just brought through the system is now presented to me with all of the data that the system has captured. And because this system has never seen an invoice from this particular vendor before, what it has done here is, at the very least, if it had recognized everything else perfectly, it would still stop and present to an operator and ask the operator to please tell it where the vendor name is located. We do this because in many instances, vendors are very proud of their graphic logo, but they don't bother to give you a nice, clean, printed version of their name to be able to pick up with OCR. So in this case, if I were really brave, I would simply go up here and draw a box around this logo, and it will pick up Supply Facilities Maintenance. Now, as an operator, I simply need to correct and put the HD in front of it, put in the spaces if those are really important for me, and carry on. And now as I tab through the remaining fields, I can see that the system picked up the invoice number for me automatically. I didn't need to tell it how to do that. It found the invoice date for me. It found my PO number for me. It found my vendor terms, and you'll note that there is a little drop-down box here. What this drop-down box is called in our system is a dictionary. And the way that it can be used is either to validate the data that was captured by the OCR engine, or to allow an operator to select from a list of standard terms phrases so that the output to the back-end systems is consistent and standardized. Okay? And once we've picked up our summary data here at the top, we're going to move into line items.
And
so we picked up
Ancora, Mike, and to clarify for our listeners that Ancora Docs software has never seen this invoice before.
That's correct.
Correct. Which is, to me, is pretty amazing. And I've been doing this a long time, and our company specializes in OCR software. And this is really one of the amazing things about Ancora Docs and what's got us so excited. So in theory, you only have to tell it who the vendor is the first time around.
That's correct.
And that's by design. Great.
Okay. And so as we enter the table area where all the line items are, the system has picked up the first description. But when I go into item quantity, the system, if I look here, the entire column of data is missing. Well, that's not going to work very well. But I look at the image and I go, okay, well, why did it miss that? Well, there are two possible columns for quantity here, neither of which indicate quantity. One of them indicates ordered, one of them indicates shipped. So the system is sitting here waiting for the operator to tell it which one of these columns to use. So what I'm going to do as an operator is I'm going to place my cursor over the first digit in the shipped column, and I'm going to click on it. And when I do, you'll watch below here in the item quantity fields and see what happens. Here I go. Click. So once I've told the system that that's the quantity field that I want to use, it's gone out now and read that entire column and populated all of those quantities for me.
That's amazing.
Okay? So the system learns very quickly, and remember that once I'm done with this invoice, all of the information that I have given the system about how to process this vendor's layout will be learned by the system and kept in a file for future use, so that the next time it sees this vendor's invoice, it will know precisely what to do with it.
Right, and that right there is I think the key to such a great invoice scanning product, and why we're so excited. And this is really a great improvement in our opinion in OCR software specifically for invoices, because you guys have done a number of really important things for our users. You've made it possible now for an AP department to process invoices that the system's never seen before without having to have me or my company come back and do a bunch of setup or train them to do a bunch of setup or coding or scripting and rules logic just to process a new type of invoice. That's number one. And secondly, you've given a really easy tool to handle tables, to handle line item columns, even if the system doesn't get it on the first go-arounds. That's great.
Well, and there's more to come, John. Let me show you the next thing here.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the things to keep in mind as we go through this is that the system has a baseline set of business logic embedded in it that is meant to say, for line items, I'm going to take the item quantity and I'm going to multiply it times the item unit price, and that must match the item amount or else I can't move forward. And then, separately, I'm going to take all of the item amounts and add them together and add that amount to any tax or freight that may be in place, and that amount must equal the invoice total amount or else I cannot complete this invoice. So all of that logic is under the covers. But I don't want to have an operator have to step through each of these fields the way I'm doing here. So instead, what we've deployed is a function key called F4 that when you press it, the system's designed to take you to the next point where an operator is required to do something, to either correct an OCR error or a business rule violation or what have you. So if I press F4 right now, the system takes me to a field where it tells me that I've got an ambiguous field value because I'm not supposed to have anything like this, or a piece of junk, if you will, in a quantity field. So as an operator, my job is to get these corrected as quickly as possible and move on. So my goal here is to simply hit the delete key, remove that character, and now I'm going to press the F4 key again. Whoops, what happened? We went all the way through page 1, and we're now on the first line item of page 2. And the system has said, okay, page 1 was fine, let's look at page 2. And I'm going to just check through these 4 fields on the first line, and once I've confirmed that pattern for the system, it will go out and pick up the rest of those lines. Now, in this one case, the system did not pick up the entire description field. If it's really important that you have that, then take your cursor, draw a little box around it, and you have it. And now if I hit F4 a third time, this invoice is complete. I simply save the changes off, and we're done with that invoice. What do you think, John?
This is pretty amazing for never being seen before, and a multi-page invoice and a table with line items. That's pretty impressive. We have other products that handle invoices, but nothing even close to that level of simplicity.
Well, we just felt that most of the products that are out on the market today, for us having been around this business for about 20 some odd years, they're all very complex, they're hard to set up, they're hard to keep maintained, and to keep the templates or the business logic up to snuff and be able to manage that whole environment on the back side of the system. So what we built, we tried very hard to make it as painless and as easy as possible for the end user to get their work done. That's the whole goal of this system.
Yeah, and I think you guys have hit that nail on the head. So to review for our listeners, what we just saw is scanning a multi-page invoice for the very first time, and Cora Docs had not seen that invoice type from that vendor, and you were able to process that the first time around. It read everything fine with a few corrections. All you ask the operator to do the first time only is to tell it where the vendor name is, and that's by design because most vendor names are logos. And once the first time around, from here on ever after, whenever Ancora Docs sees an invoice from HD Supply in this example, it will actually now use a specific template that Ancora Docs has set up specifically for HD Supply. Did I get that right?
You did, John. That very complex process that you just described of creating the business rules that are related to a specific vendor's invoice layout that we all refer to as templates. That process is done completely behind the scenes. It requires no user or integrator's intervention to create those. And any time that a user makes an update to information that the system looks for on an invoice, the system will learn that as soon as that invoice is completed.
Yeah, that's great. And that's the other key thing that I want to emphasize for our listeners is the ongoing effort it takes for an AP department and their professionals to maintain and handle new invoice flavors, if you will, from new vendors or something the system has never seen. That's a critical element that that you need to pay attention to when you're shopping for an invoice automation tool. The second item that I know my customers are always looking for in an AP environment is, that's step one. That's great to be able to OCR and pick off the header data. Usually, most folks are at least looking to pick up the header data. Sometimes the line item detail, sometimes not. In the case of doing a PO match, if it's a PO-based invoice, then they can match the line item detail against the PO record. But the other task that they spend a lot of time on and they want to automate is the routing and approval and research of an invoice. And many times I'm being told that actually can be more laborious and take more time. So I want to finish our demonstration today with the second automation step, if you will, and how Ancora Docs solves that problem too, because you guys do that included in the product, and that, again, to me is another great feature that you guys have built into the product. And if my listeners can forgive me for a second, I'll put my sales hat on for just a second and say that right now is a great time to consider purchasing the Ancora Docs software, because we are looking for AP departments that want to automate. And right now I am able to include the routing function, which we're going to finish with here in a minute, at no additional charge. But that is not typically the case. It's just a promotion, and we're looking to help our users implement the software and be a successful reference for us. And in exchange for that, we're offering the routing and workflow approval module at no charge. So with that, Mike, if you could take us through and show us that functionality, and that will finish our session for today once you show that.
You bet, John. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log off of this particular application, and I'm going to log back into our workflow demo. Now, the workflow demo consists of sort of two parts. Part one is that you still have to bring invoices through the system and do the capture elements. And part two is the actual approval process. We'll call it invoice approval workflow, for lack of a better term. Okay. So, but you can see that the environment here that I'm in it didn't change. I just happen to be in the workflow demo now. You can see up here in the left-hand corner, as opposed to an invoice demo. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a few invoices. Now the system has seen these invoices before. So I just, and for the sake of full disclosure, the system has seen these invoices before, but it's still kind of an interesting process.
So this would be a good,
we're going to
actually, Mike, that's a good example, Mike, for our listeners, so they can see how Ancora Docs does handle an invoice it's seen before. And I guess we won't have to select the vendor because it will already know where to find it, right?
That's exactly correct, John.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so we brought in our 3 invoices, and again, you can see I like to call these sort of middle of the bell curve invoices because they're not terribly difficult and they're not terribly simple. They're just kind of average invoices from your average vendor. Okay?
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and queue these up.
Yeah, actually that last invoice looks pretty ugly to me, so I'm going to be curious to see how that process is.
Well, when we jump into verify this time, the first thing that you'll notice here, John, is that it looks entirely different. Well, we have control over the configuration of the layout of verify so that we can that users can set this up to be most advantageous for their particular users, for their operators. So in this case, the image is on the left-hand side and the data is on the right instead of a top-to-bottom layout. Okay. The other thing to notice on this particular environment are the 3 fields over here that are highlighted in light blue. these fields are highlighted so that the operator understands that these are fields that are populated from sources behind the scenes, and will not allow, and these fields will not allow a user to key data into them or make any changes to them. The reason that we've done that is because what I'm going to show you here is a purchase order matching system. So under the covers behind the scenes, we brought in some purchase order data that should match to some of these invoices. And the way that the logic goes is as follows. If I have a PO number and I validate and I have an operator confirm that, then the system is going to go, and if it has not already picked up the vendor name, it will bring that vendor name into this field from the database that's associated with this PO record. Mm-hmm. The OCR system will also capture the invoice date, the invoice number, and the invoice amount, but the purchase order amount will be brought in from the PO record, and the maximum amount allowable for that invoice amount over and above the PO amount will be brought in based on who the vendor is. And then this last field is the department that this invoice is going to get sent to. Now there are a total of 4 departments actually in this demo. There is the workflow administration, there is the supervisors group, there is the receiving group, and there is the payables group. Okay? The logic that drives which department is going to receive one of these invoices has to do with whether or not a PO is present and the relationship between the invoice amount and the purchase order amount. Okay? And if all of the logic is correct and the data is valid, then the system is going to send that invoice to the receiving department to confirm receipt of goods. If for any reason there is a problem with any of these invoices, then the invoice is going to get routed to a supervisor for review and action. And when all of the invoices have either been cleared by the supervisory folks or cleared by receiving, then and only then will they go to the payables department for final action. Okay? So here we go. On our first invoice, I have a PO number. The system found that down here for me. And so when I hit Tab, the system pulls the vendor name in. It already had that. But look at it also populated the purchase order amount, the maximum amount allowable over the PO amount, and in this case it's decided to send it to the supervisor department. Why is that? What's wrong? Well, the invoice amount is $50 over the purchase order amount. So there's a violation of the business logic here. Therefore, the system is going to send this to the supervisor. Now, the role of the operator here is to simply validate the rest of the fields that were picked up by the system and validate for sure that the invoice amount is indeed correct. And it is $73.47. So routing to the supervisor is appropriate in this case, and we're going to hit our F4 key and move on to the next invoice.
And I'll remind our listeners too that these rules we're showing today are just examples for show and tell purposes. I can customize the rules to personalize them to your needs. So don't get hung up on well, I don't have that type of a group, or I want to flag it if it's $100 over. These are just for example purposes.
Exactly. Yeah, this entire environment can be tailored to any client's particular needs, their particular business logic, their departments, their users. Okay, so here we've got a second one. I've got a PO number. When I hit Tab, the system goes and pulls the vendor name in and pulls all of my order information. And the system on this one is telling me I'm going to send this to the receiving department. And again, the logic says the data's all got to be valid and the business rules all have to be valid in order for me to do that. But there is a difference between the invoice amount and the purchase order amount. However, in this case, the invoice amount is $100 less than the purchase order amount, so the max amount rule hasn't even been invoked. Okay? So I can validate through the rest of these fields, and that's all correct. So we'll hit F4 and off we go. So here is my last invoice. And in this case, the system didn't find a purchase order number. Now, as an operator, I'm going to glance around on this thing and see, is there a purchase order number anywhere? Okay. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't see a PO number. Okay. So all I can do here is to hit Tab. Since I don't have a PO number record to look against, I can't pull in the vendor name. But what I can do is I can put my cursor over on the vendor name and click on it and OCR that field. And when I do that, I can at least populate the max amount over PO because that is related to the vendor. And right away, it also tells me that I'm going to send this to the supervisor. Why? I not only don't have a PO number, but I therefore don't have a purchase order amount to compare to the invoice amount. So this whole thing is a mess. I'm going to send that to the supervisor. Hit F4, and we're done with the capture element. And now we're going to enter the actual invoice approval workflow component. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to log off of the system, and I'm going to log in as a workflow administrator initially. So as the administrator, I've logged in and I go, okay, so here's my work for all of my various departments. And I can see I have 2 invoices that are destined for the supervisor and 1 that's going to the receiving department. Okay? And I can see the status of all of these invoices is still pending. So nothing has been completed as yet. But of course, I as an administrator, I'm not actually going to do any work. So I'll log off and I'll let my supervisor log in and let them do what they need to do. So here are the 2 invoices that were routed to the supervisor. Okay? In one case, we had a total amount that was considerably over the order amount. In the second case, we had no purchase order, right? So let's see what they look like. If I double-click on this and open it up, the very first thing I see is a message telling me to check amounts deviation. Well, that means I got to check the invoice amount to the order amount, and lo and behold, yes indeed, there's a $50 differential. So I have these options here at the top of the screen that are available to the supervisor. So I can send it to receiving, I can say it's okay to pay, I can say do not pay, I can delete this invoice in its entirety, or I can cancel out and do nothing. Okay? Now, it just so happens as a supervisor that I know that there was a price increase from this vendor, and therefore I'm willing to accept this invoice amount. Now, how do I do that without fouling everybody up? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say price increase was accepted, and I'm going to send it to receiving to confirm receipt of goods. And yes, the system is going to remind me that the invoice amount is above the ordered amount, but I'll go ahead and move on. And we'll open up the second one. Now in this case, my message is that I'm missing a PO number. As a supervisor, I dutifully look for the PO number. It isn't there. And I don't have any other information telling me that I should go ahead and pay this invoice. Therefore, I'm going to tell payables, do not pay. My work queue is now empty. I don't have anything else to do. So we'll log off now, and we'll log in as the nice folks over in receiving. Okay, so we have 2 invoices here, one that was sent to us by the supervisors, and one of them that came all by its lonesome from the original capture process. So let's take a look at them. So this first one, the very first thing to notice is that there is no message here telling me of a problem. And because this came to me without a message, I know that this data is all supposed to be good. My job here is simply to go out and say, I'm going to look and see if I got 2 of those and receive them. And so I go out and look, and on the dock I only find 1. Now what? Well, I'm going to send the message to the supervisor to say, only received 1 unit, and send it off to them to take a look at. I open up my second invoice, and I can see that there was a problem with the amount information, but the supervisor has said the price increase was accepted. So again, my role as receiving is to go check and make sure that I got this stuff. I go look on the dock. Yep, that's all been received. And so I will say it's all received. My work is done. But I sent this thing off to the supervisor, and I need to make sure that I go back and look at his queue, and there's that invoice. And when I open it up, I see the message from receiving, but I happen to know as a supervisor that this thing was received on a prior shipment, so it's okay to pay this invoice. And I'm going to say, received on prior shipment, okay, I can't type today, to pay, and say okay to pay.
Yeah,
all right, so the last, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to interject, you can really start to see how the paper flow process can be sped up, and all the documentation's right there. There's no paper documents floating around with notes on it. Everything's in one place. The whole flow, in my opinion, you guys did a nice job of building in the electronic workflow, but also the ability to add the notes and document who said what, so that, again, in my job, it is to eliminate paper or speed up paper processes for our customers. This just makes it easy, really does.
Well, the beauty of it, John, is that there's obviously no paper involved, but there's also no lost paper possible. And if for some reason, how things happen to, paper gets put in somebody's in basket and it gets covered up by something else, and pretty soon it's just sort of lost. In this case, if there's a record that has an invoice that has not been dealt with within a given time frame that's configurable in the system, it will show up here in red, as you can see this bright little red box here where it says expired. So in this listing that you normally see here, it will show up and immediately notify that there's an issue with that invoice that somebody needs to take a look at. And they can move that to someone else's queue, they can send it to the supervisor, they can do a number of things with it. Okay? So let's take the last step here, and we'll log off and we'll log in as the payables department now. And so here's my completed invoices, or almost completed invoices. So the very first invoice you'll notice is in orange, and orange stands for reject pending. So for some reason, the supervisor has said this thing can't fly. And the reason is pretty clear. It's missing a PO number. And if it got to the payables department and it's still missing a PO number and the supervisor hasn't overridden it, then I am going to reject it summarily. This next one, I'm looking at the information. The admin folks say the check amount was, there was a deviation here. This was a system-generated message, by the way, because I didn't have to key that in anywhere. The system recognized the difference between the invoice amount and the PO amount and flagged it for me. And when it went to the supervisor said, hey, we had a price increase from that vendor. It was okay, and we accepted that. So from the payable standpoint, this invoice is good to go, and I can simply say pay. I understand that it's above the ordered amount, but the supervisor cleared it, and I'm going to say okay. And the last one, we had only received one unit in receiving, but the supervisor said, hey, we got that other one previously. It's okay to pay this one. Again, my payables job is very easy. I'm going to pay this one. And so now I'm all done. And at the end of the day, the system administrator will come in, and they'll take a look, and what they'll find is that their work is all completed, and they can see the status of every invoice in the system. The first one was rejected. The other two were approved. Okay? And so into the lesson for invoice automation workflow for today.
That's great, Mike. I appreciate you showing that for our listeners, and that's going to finish up our session today in our Part 2 video series of automating paper invoices with the Encora Docs product, which we're very excited about. I would encourage our listeners, if you have not listened to Part 1 video, go back to my YouTube channel if you would, and look for the YouTube channel out there. Should look like this, with the paper, with the no paper symbol, and go to the accounts payable playlist. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the Part 1 videos there. One's a full and one's a shortened version. So please watch that. And again, to recap, Ancora Docs software for scanning invoices. It's going to really automate really the 2 or 3 main key things, and Mike, correct me if I missed something, but number one, for AP folks, it's going to eliminate the manual data entry step in the process by automatically recognizing invoices that's never even seen before and ask you only the first time to click again on just where the vendor name is. Once you do that, it'll create a template for you, and it'll recognize that that invoice type from that vendor from there forward. So it's a great, easy way to be able to read invoices that the system's never seen before. So that's number one. The second thing it'll do for our AP listeners is automate the workflow process of approving invoices for payment. So no more routing paper documents around. Everything will be electronic, right on the screen. Different users can log in and see the work that they have to be done all electronically, no paper whatsoever. And then third, we saw the ability to make corrections electronically and balance and correct errors electronically. So again, no paper process. Did that about summarize everything?
That about covers what we covered today, John.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you joining. That's it for now. Feel free to see my YouTube channel again or www.binaryoffice.com. And I would also encourage you, if you are actively looking to automate your invoice processing, please feel free to contact us directly at Binary Office here. We're based in Mesa, Arizona. There's my contact information there. Please feel free to call me at 602-690-0944. And that's it for now. We'll sign off. Thanks again, Mike Haggins.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody.